So good morning to everybody joining us at home for the latest in our Liverpool MIPIM webinar series. We're just going to wait a minute or two for everybody to log on, and then we will get going with this morning's webinar. So while we wait for everybody to come on, I will go through this screen, which you're all very familiar with now. As always, we can't hear or see you, so please do make use of our chat and Q&A function. Our panelists will be able to answer the questions throughout the webinar and towards the end. So any questions you do have, please use either of those and ask as many questions as you like. Please do remember to check out the Invest Liverpool website afterwards in case you do have to leave early or you'd like to send it on to any colleagues, as there will be a full recording as well as a brief overview of the main findings from today's event. So you'll be able to find that on investliverpool.com, and as I say, please feel free to share that along with anybody who you may find it relevant, and do let them know about our future webinars, and they're free to join us. Once again, just a huge thank you to all of our Liverpool MIPIM partners, who without the support we wouldn't be able to make these events happen. It is a true effort from everybody involved, and Stephen will say a little bit more about that very shortly. But yeah, we'd just like to pass on our thanks to all of them as always, as we couldn't do it without them. Yeah, so without further ado, I'll pass over to Stephen, who will be able to introduce today's panel, and we will kick things off.
Thank you, Stefan, and yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Stephen Cowperthwaite, Principal and Managing Director at Avison Young Liverpool, and also Chair of the Liverpool MIPIM Steering Group. And I'd like to reiterate what Stefan has already said in terms of thanking our partners who are listed on screen, who are supporting us as we continue our programme of events through the next 6 months. And then building up to hopefully a return to MIPIM Cannes next year. So watch this space. We've got a number of events, and if you're interested in signing up, then please do get in touch to join the conversation along with us. So yeah, today's webinar, UK Cities Recovery Index, Liverpool, a city at the forefront of the UK's economic recovery webinar, in association with Avison Young, and I'll be joined by Daryl Perry, who is Head of Research at Avison Young, and our panel, who I'll introduce very shortly. But quite an opportune time to host today's webinar, being the last day of National Lockdown 2.0, as we move into Tier 2 tomorrow. So I think, you know, what we've seen, the city, we were fast out of the blocks as a city and a region in terms of submitting economic recovery plan to government. We were the first region to go into Tier 3, the first to deploy mass testing, and particularly in relation to the asymptomatic testing, which is proven to be well taken up, and we'll probably hear something about that during the course of this webinar as well. And also we'll be the first city region to come out of the highest tier of restrictions into a lower tier. So, continuing our tradition of being a city of firsts. So I think, it's going to be great with our panelists. So I'm joined by Bill Addy, who's Chief Executive of the Liverpool Bid Company, Donna Howitt, Marketing Director of Liverpool One and Grosvenor, and Martin Thompson, Head of Policy at Liverpool City Council. But first of all, we're going to go over to Daryl, who is going to run through the UK Cities Recovery Index for us, give us a bit of background, and specifically in relation to Liverpool as well. So over to you, Daryl, please.
Thank you very much, Steve, and thanks very much, Stefan. So I'm just going to share my screen. I'm assuming that's all good, Steve?
Good.
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you firstly about the UK Cities Recovery Index, a piece of work that we've been doing at Avison Young. But before I kind of get down into Liverpool and what it shows for Liverpool, I want to talk you through really kind of what we've been doing and why. So if I take you back to kind of the middle of March, when I guess this was the COVID-19 was first in our lives, We obviously were just sent home. So we were sent home for 2 to 3 weeks by the government. And it was clear at that point that there was a lot happening. So the pandemic was clearly spreading, first out of China, then into other countries. But we were seeing significant economic impact. So stock markets were plummeting. Our markets were changing in real estate. We'd already seen a number of deals really kind of fall out of bed or stop for the time being. And even on the construction side, we'd seen a number of construction schemes stop. I think what was interesting from our side at that time was because we were just about to come to a quarter end, it really kind of highlighted some of the issues that we were facing. So, rents were just about to be collected. Or not, as would actually occur. And from our side, in terms of the work we do, we really take a view of the market every quarter. And it really occurred to us that any market analysis that we could do was essentially not irrelevant, but much less useful than it would be in usual times. So really, we took it upon ourselves to start thinking, okay, what more could we be doing? What more could we be doing to understand the situation? And I think this is important, and this is, what a lot of other organizations have done as well. But one of the most significant things we did was actually look to China. So because China was ahead of us in terms of their dealings with the virus, what we saw at that time was a lot of economic houses publishing what we call like high frequency economic data. So in terms of shipping activity, in terms of flights. So we started doing the same. We started looking at footfall. We started looking at environmental measures in terms of nitrogen dioxide and a few other aspects. But one of the issues, I guess, with looking at footfall or flights or restaurant bookings is that it just tells you that. And what we were trying to do is really start building a bit more of a holistic picture as to what was going on in our economy and going on in our most important cities. So what we tried to do was really looking at all of the information that was out there, in terms of high frequency data, is start really painting a picture of what was happening in our cities, what was happening in the economy. We weren't trying to create a proxy for GDP, although I'll come on to that in a short while, or a new way of measuring real estate. But what we were really trying to do is understand our markets in real time. It wasn't enough to be looking at markets on a monthly basis, certainly not a quarterly basis. And the same is happening now. The same is happening now. Things are happening on a daily basis. So, we wanted to get an understanding for what was going on. So what we did is we cast our net wide. We looked at all of the data, all of the information that was out there that we thought would help paint that picture. We started with an open mind. We started thinking, was it Joe Wick's YouTube hits? Was it the number of Netflix subscriptions? Anything that would really paint that economic recovery. And what we're able to do is then capture hundreds of thousands of data points and feed them in. And when you capture hundreds of thousands of data points, it looks like this. So this is all of the data we were capturing. Obviously not too clear to anyone. And what we were trying to do really is turn what we've been able to do with the recovery index is turn this vermicelli, if you will, into a clear understanding of what's going on across the UK and in Liverpool in terms of the economic recovery. So this is the national index, and you can see that's mapped against COVID hospitalizations over the time. So for those who are particularly interested, what we've done here is take February the 29th as our normal, as our 100, our day zero. And you can see going through early March and early April, you saw that significant fall in the recovery index where it hovered through April, May, and most of June. where we started seeing some significant economic recovery, and really probably one of the reasons why we built this recovery index was to actually track the recovery, is that we expected that once kind of shops were able to open up, once pubs and at that time the most important of all, hairdressers were able to kind of open up, we'd start seeing that recovery in our economies. And we certainly did see that. So you can see beginning of July, Super Saturday, as soon as kind of shops and pubs opened, you can see that significant increase. And that continued throughout the summer. A lot of people staycationing, some out of choice, and people going out to really enjoy their lives. So the Eat Out to Help Out scheme was significantly important with regards to this. I think what we were probably hoping and expecting to see in September was, as children went back to school, to see that kind of move on nationally. It didn't happen. Kind of the rate of infection increased, government guidance changed accordingly. And then throughout September and most of October, certainly due to a number of the restrictions in key cities, we saw that kind of the recovery index first kind of stabilize, but then trend gradually downwards. Now, as you can see quite clearly, since the start of the lockdown restrictions in England at the beginning of November, that's obviously a significant fall since. Just to paint more of a picture as to what's included in the recovery index. So what we've done, and I can break this down for you in a second, what we've done is we've broken the economy down and broken kind of real estate down by 6 sectors. So commercial activity, hotel and leisure, mobility, so essentially people's ability to move around, the residential sector, the retail sector, and then of course return to office. And it's also worth pointing out that so the recovery index, so we've looked at Liverpool, but we've also looked at 9 other cities. So London, and then the largest regional cities in the UK. And it's been quite interesting to see how the others have tracked against each other. So you can see Bristol is in orange at the top there. Bristol was really tracking above most other cities for a large portion of time. That's obviously tailed off, but comparatively is still performing relatively well in terms of its economic recovery. Obviously, Bristol has now gone into tier 3. London in the light blue, that was at the bottom, certainly during August, September, and most of October. And you can see that's kind of, because of its reliance on public transport, it hasn't really performed significantly well. It never saw that economic recovery that perhaps other cities did. Of course, all of this is relative to the city's own performance. If we look at Liverpool, and we'll drill down a little bit more into detail, you can see Liverpool actually, because of the increase in restrictions, Liverpool in August and September was towards, I guess, one of the highest performing cities in terms of its recovery. Obviously, increased restrictions later on, so the economic recovery curtailed somewhat. So if I just draw your attention to kind of Liverpool itself, this is Liverpool against the national index. And what you can see is that Liverpool has trended above the national index pretty much, well, yeah, throughout the entire period. And what I've done here is highlight the two kind of, one, Liverpool going into tier 3, which and the impact that had is that you can see that kind of the difference between Liverpool and the national really tightened at that time as a result of those restrictions. And then again, I've highlighted the national lockdown in England. So again, Liverpool responded relatively similar in a relatively similar way to the rest of the country. A little spike up in half term, and as people kind of had a little bit of a last hurrah pre-lockdown, and then a significant fall in the first few weeks before plateauing significantly. I think what's potentially more interesting is when you kind of really drill down into some of the data, into some of the sectors. So as with the kind of the first lockdown, the hardest hit sectors, you can see here are mobility and hotel and leisure, really kind of unsurprisingly. So on the hotel and leisure side, we've seen a 50% fall since the end of August when it peaked. So it had been at 86, now is reading at 73. And interestingly, we'd seen, I said about that kind of mini boost, that certainly helped the sector. I think on the mobility side, that has been particularly interesting. We've seen a relative strength from Liverpool on that front in terms of people's eagerness to get around the city. So Liverpool was as low as 30 in April. It actually peaked at just above 100 in mid-September. And now we've seen a little bit of a fall, albeit an increase in the last few days, maybe as kind of the impact of restrictions have kind of worn off in people's minds, and people are keen to kind of start getting out there a little bit more. Commercial activity. So I think commercial activity, so you'll see that's the purple line, which has remained relatively stable. Commercial activity is a relatively interesting one. In Liverpool, it actually showed some significant resilience, certainly during the first lockdown. And what we like to see, what we like to say about commercial activities, we think it represents the non-socially distanced element of the economy. So it's looking at kind of HGV traffic, looking at shipping, those type of things, as well as unemployment and business confidence. I'll come on to commercial activity in a little bit more detail because I think it is interesting. But you can see there it's been resilient all the way through. I guess a part of the economy which has been more than resilient is the residential sector index. So you can see that's been the highest performing for quite a while. Obviously, we've seen significant activity, both in terms of listings, in terms of sales, and in terms of the confidence in the housing market. So that's been a particularly buoyant aspect of the economy. Potentially kind of less interesting for some, certainly those who are dreading going back to the office, although I think that number is dwindling by the day. The return to office sector index is the kind of the grey-brown line towards the bottom. And you can see that's been relatively resilient throughout, certainly throughout August and September, October, which was quite interesting because actually the change to the guidance around getting back to the office actually changed during this time. But what we found is that those who were going in continued to do so, and we're keen to kind of get back into the office, albeit it has fallen off since the new level of restrictions. I just want to highlight, and I know Bill won't like this, but I just want to highlight kind of the, I guess, how sensitive the recovery index, what I've done there. So you'll see mobility in the orange line, and you'll see this is the 26th of June. So you'll see a spike up as Liverpool won the league. So that that spike in mobility was as a result of Liverpool winning the league and people going out to celebrate. It's also worth pointing out on the purple line that commercial activity, that dip in commercial activity a couple of days later, probably partially as a result, I imagine, of that spike in mobility on the 26th of June. Whilst we're keen not to use, I guess, do direct comparisons between cities, I think it's important to learn the lessons and of other cities and the experiences of other cities. So you can see here, I mentioned commercial activity, and these charts look at where Liverpool is in relation to the other cities. So if we started at commercial activity, I said initially that Liverpool showed some significant strength, and that was in relation to other cities. What we've seen, however, certainly since kind of July going onwards, actually Liverpool has tracked below other cities and hasn't seen the economy kick on in a way a number of other cities have. On hotel and leisure, Liverpool has been relatively, I guess, middle of the pack, looking at a few of the experiences other cities have seen. But on mobility, we've seen Liverpool continue to be relatively strong. So people have continued to get out and about, certainly to shops, certainly to kind of leisure and recreation when they could, and going through stations. On the residential side, I mentioned Liverpool's, that there's obviously that recovery has been relatively strong, significantly above our normal. But you can see in relation to a number of other cities, it hasn't been as strong. I think what's been probably a little bit stronger is on the retail side, where possible, and again, it obviously hasn't been possible all the way through. Where people have been able to, they've continued to go to shops where they could. I mentioned the ability to look at other cities for lessons, and I just want to draw on Cardiff here. Cardiff is particularly interesting. They had a Wales fire break, a nationwide fire break in October, and that's been able to kind of show us quite a few lessons. So what we've been able to do is by looking at other cities. So this is Cardiff, as I said. We were able to look at the difference between Cardiff and Bristol, and the restrictions. And what you can see that Cardiff and Bristol actually tracked each other relatively well, up until really first the surrounding the local restrictions that happened in areas around Cardiff. Then, of course, the Cardiff local restrictions. It was really when the Welsh fire break happened that you could see a real significant divergence. So what we've been able to do, what we were able to do at the time, is actually look at using regression analysis, look at what Cardiff should have done if those impacts hadn't happened, and actually start hypothesizing and predicting what we believe these cities would do in the future going forward. So we hypothesized that other cities, certainly Bristol, would see a 20% fall. What we've seen probably is that actually that fall hasn't been as significant, and we've seen more like a 10 to 12% fall in a number of cities. And it's worth looking here for, and there's a number of reasons for that. The different restrictions, the Welsh and English lockdowns weren't exactly similar. There were certainly different restrictions around where people could go and where people could shop. But what's probably worth highlighting is actually the difference in this lockdown compared to the last one. So this is lockdown version 1 in green, and you can see what we've done is taken 100 as 7 days previous. So already people were getting worried about, I guess, the impending lockdown, starting to stay home, and you can see obviously the significant decrease. Obviously that wasn't the case in lockdown 2. We actually saw a little bit of a spike up this time before the lockdown measures came into play, and since then we've seen about a 12 to 13% drop in the recovery index. So really different attitudes as people have tried to generally kind of keep on going, which is good signs for the economy. Maybe it's a little bit more nuanced when it comes to whether these restrictions are having the impact on stopping the spread. Just another point I wanted to make is that on the GDP side, I said this wasn't a proxy for GDP. What we've realized is actually it tracks GDP relatively well. So what we've been able to do then is start looking at using this as a little bit of a real-time analysis of the economy, understanding what's going on in the economy, and it enables us to predict, certainly because GDP comes with a 6 weeks lag, really understand what those GDP figures are so that we can get a better understanding of what's going on in real time. And that suggests, which would obviously suggest a little bit of a fall going forward. I think the last point I just wanted to add, and I think it's potentially the most interesting, is that this isn't just about kind of the big cities, about city centers themselves. This is about so much more about the about the whole country. And what we've seen is that different understandably different parts of the country have reacted to this in very different ways. Now I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but this is just workplace looking at February, which was essentially normal, so that shade of yellow is normal. The depths of the lockdown in April, and you can see in October what happened there. You can see that much of the country is still not going to the workplace, but there are pockets which are kind of significantly below, looking at about kind of 30 to 40% below where it should be. By and large, I don't know how good your geography is, but essentially those are a map that where it's below average, even further than the national. Those are essentially our larger cities in the UK, which is understandable because there is a big difference. And when you get down to a local level in Liverpool, you can see that actually kind of is underlined even further. So this looks at people going to supermarkets, people going to shops, as well as going through stations and workplaces. And it's clear here, and we've put Manchester on just as a point of comparison, that actually the city centres have been more significantly hit than local areas. There's been some relative strength in some of the markets, certainly in terms of mobility, which has been good news for the economy in certain cases. And I think one of the things that we've been keen to kind of point out is that there are differences. There are relative winners and losers, albeit in a very difficult situation. But there are some benefits, certainly in terms of the strength of local high streets and other aspects, which we think are important to kind of capture going forward. So that's all I really wanted to talk to you about. Back to you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Daryl. Very, very useful. And you and I have had the conversation before, is that it's not just about the data, it's what you do with that data and how you interpret it. There's a lot of it out there, as you showed on that first slide, which was a complete mess. So I think you and the research team have done wonders to actually put some meaningful analysis to that. So let's and I'll just bring everybody to attention. Obviously there is a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen there, so if you do have any questions for our panel, then please post them onto there, and we'll try and get to them through the course of the next 30 minutes or so. Martin, I'll come to you first, because obviously data and interpretation of that data is very important from your perspective in terms of policy making, both coming out of lockdown previously, moving into tier 3, and obviously we've now got moving into tier 2 tomorrow. So I mean, how important is this data and the kind of analysis that we've been able to see there from Daryl?
Extremely helpful. The index is fantastic. Personally, I'm more used to looking at the longer term economic trends. So having something real time, changing by the week, and being able to compare that to other cities has been extremely important over lockdown. I think the mood music in Liverpool is really positive at the moment, which is strange given all the challenges going on nationally. I think one point I'd like to pick up on, you're talking about city centres and the differential impact across the country. One of the big challenges, I work almost daily with the core cities network, feeding into government, civil service, etc., etc. A lot of the government response has been very flat, based on per head of population or something. I think a really important point we need to make is that city centres have been impacted much more intensely than other parts of the country, yet the economic responses from government tend to don't recognise that issue. And I think if there's one key issue nationally we need to be making as cities, that would be the point I would make, and the index helps us make that point really well.
Yeah, really, I think that's a really relevant point. As you say, everywhere is impacted to different degrees. And Daryl, I don't know if you just want to come in on that in terms of how this can be used to help inform that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the point you make around cities being kind of disproportionately affected is a really good one, Martin. That is certainly the case, and you know, the last kind of image I shared really highlights that. I think one of the interesting conversations that we've had with a number of clients and a number of other kind of cities is around kind of, you know, the direction of travel going forward. So, you know, are there elements of positivity where people have started using maybe kind of secondary, tertiary, you know, centers which haven't been in use for many of years? Is there a strength to those markets? Now, I don't believe that this is at the expense of a major city by any stretch of the imagination, but I think some of the most interesting conversations we've had, certainly as a business, have been kind of looking, okay, you know, if people are going to be home a little bit more, even in the medium to long term, you know, are there, you know, are there new kind of use classes in terms of real estate that we should be thinking about? You know, how can we capture what might be an increase in the daytime, in the week time population? So yeah, from our side, it's looking at the whole picture, really, as Martin said.
I think that's a theme that we can come back to, because obviously from yourself, Martin, in terms of district centres across the, you know, the city, but then if you look at the wider city region on various towns, how they're reacting. But I think, you know, touching upon the question of retail is a neat segue into Donna to, you know, share experiences of, you know, from Liverpool One. And obviously, you know, we've seen from the recovery index the resilience that Liverpool has shown from a retail and that mobility perspective. So what have you seen, and what are you learning? And obviously on a day, the day before we go into tier 2 restrictions, but also the day that we've had the news of Debenhams and obviously Arcadia yesterday, which impact potentially. So your own thoughts, please.
Yeah, you're right there. Just in terms of that summary, Stephen, it's extremely turbulent on the high street. It is a challenge, challenge for all sectors. But actually, if we step back and we look at what we've learned from coming out of first phase lockdown, and I think it's really important in terms of homing in on that data that we and the observations earlier on in the summer. So non-essential retail reopened on the 15th of June. And we gradually saw volumes starting to increase. You know, we referenced earlier in July, restaurants could reopen. The government's Eat Out to Help Out scheme became available, and almost felt as if life was starting to get back to some degree of normality. Now, what we saw, particularly within Liverpool in the city centre and our data at Liverpool One, is the performance and the recovery in terms of the benchmarks against the rest of the UK, or even the
I think have we lost Donna there? Is that my connection?
I think we've lost Donna temporarily.
I'm sure Donna will come back. She was in full flow there as well, so hopefully we'll get it back. But Bill, we'll come across to you. Obviously, you're chair of the, you know, you look after the Liverpool bid, but you have a wider national remit from a bid perspective as well. So, you know, some great initiatives we've had in Liverpool with the likes of Without Walls, etc. But again, you know, the data, how are you using that data, and how are you you know, going forward, and what more can we do as we go into tier 2?
Thanks, Stephen. I'll just come back into that, and perhaps I can just pick up on Donna's point, because I think Donna what she was saying was that the resilience in the city centre is shown in the data that we have, and clearly we can see that in our footfall data that shows. In fact, Donna said she's coming back in a moment. She just texted me.
Good.
The footfall that we saw in the city showed that our footfall bounced during July and August back to a minus 25%. And just in terms of numbers, what minus 25% means that instead of the 1.25 million, our footfall in the city centre was 1.1 million, and that was at the height of the without walls. That also showed, so that footfall was also measured in the spend information that we have. We currently, in the bid company, have a relationship with Movement Strategies. The Q3 visa data also showed that our visa spend went from Q3 in 2019 was 34.5 million spent on restaurants. In Q2, when we were at the height of lockdown, it was 2.4 million. And by Q3, it was 63.3 million. That's 63.3 million spent in the L1 and L2 postcodes. It also showed very similar with clothing, with the retail and high street, that the city has bounced back, so, and can bounce back if the conditions are right for it. Clearly, bouncing back and then going back into a lockdown has not helped, and we've seen those casualties on the high street very, very public, and the very sad casualties, particularly for those people employed in those major department stores and shops in the city centre. And yeah, we think about them specifically at the moment, but sadly, that's not just due to COVID, and there are lots of issues around that, and the data will show that when we come and look at it. But we, as I say, at this moment in time, we want to think about how the city centre is recovering. So the initiatives that helped the city centre in July and August, so that was the Liverpool Without Walls, which was the first initiative, which enabled over 3,000 extra covers to come into the city centre, with restaurants moving out into the streets. Castle Street and Bold Street across Liverpool 1 was then supported by the Eat Out to Help Out campaign, and you can clearly see that in the information that we have. Now with reopening tomorrow, thankfully, because of the hard work in the city around mass testing, about controlling the virus, we entered national lockdown at the highest category, and we come out in the sort of the middle category. It's still high, but it does allow us, most importantly, to open our restaurants up. And our restaurants are opened up, and now they're opened up with a curfew that isn't an absolute lockdown at 10 o'clock. It's close at 10 with last orders, last person out by 11 o'clock. And that's an incredibly important extra hour for our restaurants, because it's the difference between making a smaller loss and actually breaking even and making a small profit, because they're allowed to have that extra sitting during the evening. So it's vital that we see that. The Without Walls, which during the summer and in the early autumn, we can sit outside. Obviously the weather's good in Liverpool all year round, but it's a bit colder in the winter. We are looking at how that can be weatherproofed, so that the work is ongoing. You've probably all seen that with Gino's on Castle Street with the first one up. Other restaurants on Castle Street and Bold Street will follow suit as we make our restaurant businesses sustainable. And our retailers are talking about extended opening hours. They've got 3 weeks now to really enable people to come in and come in and shop safely, but then also to try and do some recovery towards the end of this year.
Excellent.
Just to pick up, sorry, Steve, just to pick up on the point that Bill made, I think what we can, on those lessons from Cardiff that we've learned, I think what we'd probably expect maybe this weekend is for that footfall to really recover, and certainly the lessons we learned from Liverpool in the first lockdown as the restrictions were lifted there. I think we would probably expect footfall to be quite significantly, potentially the highest it's been all year in the weekend ahead. Obviously, you'll be aware of the positives and negatives of that.
Yeah, and I think on that very point, obviously, as you say, lessons learned from Cardiff, but equally we know that Wales are putting in new restrictions as of Friday this week. So, Martin, probably two elements and here. One, Bill touched upon the mass testing. So your views on how successful that has been and how it could be, used going forward potentially, but also in terms of those lessons learned from the likes of Cardiff, what we can be doing as a city and a region to help prevent that situation arising where we end up back into restrictions in a short space of time.
I think the context, 6 weeks ago, Liverpool had the highest rate in the country, something touching up towards 700, yesterday I heard we'd just gone below 100. So a remarkable achievement. I think the other significant thing about the mass testing pilot we've done in Liverpool is our relationship with national governments. The government's winter COVID strategy mentioned Liverpool 4 times in the Prime Minister's introduction. The city has never been a favourite of national government. So I think we're in a really interesting period now. We were the first major city, you know, we really got our act together with our economic recovery plan submitted to government towards the end of May. And that's where all the work like Without Walls was a major part of that. So there's lots of interesting ideas we're still discussing with government, pressing for some support on that. The thing that's been a real eye-opener for me as well is the partnership behind initiatives like Without Walls. We were really quick getting that partnership together between the public and private sectors. So when I said earlier, the mood music in Liverpool is feeling good, it really is. I think we've shown flexibility, we're swift out of the blocks, and yeah, it's looking positive. And to have that strong relationship and ongoing dialogue with government is a position Liverpool has never been in my experience.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we've done a number of different webinars, and the mood music has definitely been very positive, and it's building upon that. And I've said many times that successful cities have strong civic leadership, so it's good to see that coming to the fore at the moment. Welcome back, Donna. You were in full flow then, I think, talking in terms of the summer, etc. And Bill's touched upon the Without Walls initiative, but do you want to follow on from where you were and protect, you know, again, Bill was talking about the data and spend data, so maybe give a bit of insight in terms of what you've seen in terms of where people have been coming from to engage with Liverpool and what you expect going forward as well.
Yeah, apologies for that. If there's ever a sign to get back and work in the office, do that. So apologies, I broke off somehow there. I was in full flow, and I was just to share, really picking up on kind of Martin's sentiment there and the positivity and this kind of light at the end of the tunnel. If we look at the data and we look at what we saw as we came out of first phase lockdown, by the end of August, footfall volumes in the city centre were level with the same volumes of 2019, which was fantastic to see. And when we look into some of the mobile app data that we have access to, what we're able to see is really understand the demographics and the type of people that are coming back sooner. No surprise that a younger audience, a younger demographic starting to return into the city centre first, but pockets of older, more mature audiences also coming back in as well. And I think if we really look at that data and we're able to demonstrate as a city that there is that confidence and there is a very resilient marketplace there, that is really the insight that we need, that we can use. We know that the city region, it's a place, it has a reputation, it has a personality. There's a narrative there that people understand very, very often in a very positive light, sometimes in a way that challenges us as a city and a city region. And I think accessing the newest, most relevant data that we've started to gather literally throughout the last 2 to 3 months is fundamental in terms of reinforcing some of the great things about our region that we know, but also using it to challenge some of the perceptions that are out there, because we have been able to demonstrate that we are a city and a city region that collaborates. It's been mentioned in terms of the leadership and the dialogue that has taken place, not just weekly, but daily across many partners and businesses across the whole region. And I think there's been some real green shoots appearing within Liverpool. One, we knew as we came out of lockdown, we still opened an additional 4 or 5 brands at that time. Even this week, as we go into tier 2, we'll be opening 3 new brands that haven't traded ever before at Liverpool One. One of them is leisure. It's the most challenging time for them to be able to open, but they want to be in Liverpool. And that's fantastic. And I think picking up on some of those case studies and understanding the data and the insight that has persuaded those brands to come in and want to be in our city centres and in our city region is absolutely fundamental. I also think, and it's more kind of anecdotal initially, and we looked into the data, but through the summer months, we've noticed that, you know, people are spending less on fuel, they're spending less on holidays, but they still want to spend. And when given the opportunity, they chose to spend it on lifestyle. Short stays, I think Bill's mentioned, and if not, it's worth mentioning that hoteliers are starting now to see a real uplift as we move into tier 2, and that's people choosing to come into the city centre in particular. They haven't been away on holiday, and they're choosing Liverpool because of its reputation and because of, I think, the fact that we have throughout the whole period, despite being the first region to go into tier 3, have demonstrated that with all of our planning, safety does come first. And there's been some fantastic work that's gone on for the extent of mass testing that has happened over the last few weeks. We've heard Brummie accents, we've heard accents that aren't Scouse. You know, it's people coming in from outside of the area, and some of our mobile data has shown that. And I think the key thing now as we go into tier 2 is that we don't throw away all of the good work that has been done to get us into that position with mass testing. And the big difference now, we know, is that we will open back up and that people will be able to come into the city centre in their households and in their bubbles. But what people can do now is they can shop, they can dine, they can enjoy hotels, and they can get tested. And I think that's the key ingredient as we move forward.
Yeah, really, really positive that, Donna. And as you said there, building upon the strengths that we had going into national lockdown and the start of the pandemic, it's important that we don't forget those, isn't it? And use them moving forward. I think what's really interesting is that plainly we've got the local people engaging. We're starting to get other people coming back into the city. One of the questions that we've got here is what are we doing to get the tourism back in Liverpool? Because plainly, if we can layer on the tourism onto what we've already got, then it probably puts us potentially in a better position than what we were previously. So, Bill, I think one for you to come in on.
Yeah, if I can just pick up on the question, yes, we are painfully aware of the impact on tourism. I chair the Liverpool Visitor Economy and Network, and that Visitor Economy Network has met weekly since March. We used to meet quarterly, we've met weekly since March. Painfully aware of the impact on all of our tourism across, we know with the hotel sectors. And what have we been doing to try and support that initially? Obviously, a lot of the support mechanism that's come from the City Council and from the combined authority, particularly into those businesses which provide that. And yesterday was the latest announcement and the latest applications open for the additional restrictions grant, particularly for the supply chain, for those businesses that perhaps don't have a business rates liability and missed out. So that is open. In terms of what we're doing moving forward, we can only work within the restrictions that are placed upon us. So a lot of our tourism and destination marketing spend is spent on encouraging people to come in from overseas, come in from other areas in the UK. None of that can be achieved at this moment in time. None of that can be spent. We have a campaign for Christmas, which is about really coming into the city centre, but coming safely. And in fact, Donna should speak about the campaigns, because within the Visitor Economy Network, Donna chairs the marketing subgroup that drives that together with Marketing Liverpool. But we are working on plans for next summer for 21. We hope that with mass testing, with the vaccination program as well, that will be coming out soon, and that will be rolled out across the city and across the UK, that by the spring, hopefully by April, May, that we're able to start really reopening our tourism sector. But Donna, if you can pick up on the campaigns, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I think, yeah, one of you've acknowledged there as well that the biggest challenge, and we've seen that in some of the comments, is making sure that those businesses that simply haven't been able to operate or to function as normal are supported, so that those businesses are still there when we come out of the impact of pandemic and we can start to rebuild again. We need those businesses in place to be part of the rebuild. But turning to campaign, as somebody has already mentioned, a lot of tourism is free. It is our place. It's it's the city centre. It's the open spaces that we have to offer. And there are campaigns that are being delivered to pushing slightly further afield. We know that throughout the summer it was very much about a hyper-local audience and local residents becoming tourists. We still need some of that to continue. And indeed, we've seen that throughout this last phase of lockdown, people coming out and walking around, enjoying outdoor spaces, enjoying the Christmas lights in the city centre, despite the majority of businesses being closed. But the campaign to encourage people to come out and enjoy our open spaces at a time when it's, that's what they need, is to be able to, it's good for mental health, but to come out and see our open spaces, enjoy the fabric that is, Liverpool, the waterfront, the city region. So there is a constant presence in the marketplace from Liverpool, taking some of its key assets and reminding people of the beauty of the region, because when people, if they're not visiting now, want to be able to visit, it's really important we keep a presence of mind there. One of the things that's particularly interesting, however, is the conversations that are taking place for us to look at other cities longer term as we move into spring. We want to see more flights. We want, more air traffic to come in, and we have to look at, closer to home. Belfast is a really good example, or by train. We've got great connection now to Glasgow, to Edinburgh, and how we connect with those cities in contra terms, because the people of Liverpool, yes, we want them to be our tourists, but human nature, people are going to want to travel further away, and they're going to want to do something different when they feel safe enough to do so. So in terms of partnering with other cities and how we can benefit from their local audiences, and there's a lot of data insight to that in terms of the demographic profiling of the cities, and how do we model what Liverpool has to offer with the audience that Liverpool has to other cities, so that we can benefit, in a contra-based way. So what's important now is that we continue to do the good marketing that is coming out of the Marketing Liverpool team in particular, which is making sure that people have a real confidence in the city and that safety does come first. And it has been a challenge because Liverpool has been in the spotlight throughout for many, many good reasons. But if anybody's got relatives in other parts of the country like I have, at one point in time, they felt that the city was really, really struggling. And actually the infection rates were so bad you weren't stepping out of your front door. We see a different story when we live and work here. So the marketing activity now is reinforce safety, reinforce that sense of place, but then use the data to look at other areas across the UK where we can start to rebuild initially with domestic tourism, because we know that international tourism is going to take longer to come back online.
Martin, you're obviously engaged in conversations with some of those other cities as well. So, what kind of conversations are you having? It's good to hear from a campaign perspective from Donna, but, for yourself from a policy in terms of those, discussions with other cities, how we can work with each other and complement each other, maybe?
I think the big thing across all the cities is this kind of idea of building back better. We've seen during shutdown, fewer cars in city centres. A lot of the political leaders in cities are keen to try and capture that opportunity and move that longer term trend, clean the air in our cities, have it more livable and walkable. Now, that could quite easily all be lost once we come out of the COVID situation. So they're the kind of, I'd say, medium term ideas that are of interest. In terms of the situation in other cities, I've never been so inundated by people contacting Liverpool to ask what we've been doing. Again, it was like the point I made earlier about the national context. Liverpool is seen by its peers in the other cities as leading the way throughout COVID. And there's a lot of interest here. And people are asking how we did things like without walls so quickly. We've been advising government on that. We've been advising the West End of London. So there's a lot of interest in what we're doing here in Liverpool. I think the collective stuff we're doing is maybe more about the medium term. I think, just back onto the markets in Liverpool point earlier about opening up the city, I think it's very clear we need to get, over the next 3 weeks, we need to be looking at our local and regional audience, getting them back comfortable in the city centre in particular, before we start looking at opportunities for attracting national audiences, and then hopefully towards the end of the next year, international as well. So a kind of tiered approach, but obviously we need to stay on top of the situation. Safety has to come first. We did a fair bit of soul searching, I guess, throughout September. We'd been so, we'd had such a good August. We got footfall back at the start of September, and then, you know, students came back, etc. And the COVID situation, you know, we were at the front of that second wave in the city. So we have to be cautious and flexible going forward, I would say.
Yeah, and that brings us on to a question that Tom Horton has asked to get the crystal ball out, basically, and say, how long do we think Tier 2 is going to last? Do we expect to be in Tier 2 until March? And what impact is this going to have on hospitality? Bill, Donna, how's your crystal ball looking at the moment?
Well, if I can just come back to Tom and first of all say that, well, clearly Tier 2 at this moment in time means that our nighttime economy is decimated because only pubs which serve substantial meals, and I understand there's a question in the House at the moment about what constitutes a substantial meal, but our good traditional pubs aren't able to open and haven't been able to open, and our events is still struggling. But what we do know, they're going to be, the tiers will be reviewed every fortnight, is what we're told. We're told there's a sunset clause in the legislation that they will fall away by the middle of February, but that's all supposition. At this moment in time, we know that we have to control coronavirus, so we have to ensure that people continue with testing, and the testing regime will be in place throughout the period until the vaccination has impacted the whole of the population. So continue to get tested and continue to act responsibly. And the only way we'll ever move into lower tiers is if we get the infection rates down, which Martin has said today is we're below 100 and we're continuing to fall. So people need to, as we've said throughout this, when we opened up in June, the strap was be kind, be patient, be responsible. And that's the key thing. This is in each individual's responsibility to ensure they minimize the transmission by acting safely and responsibly. And we will get out of this as quickly as we can do.
And I think to a degree, the testing program has kept COVID front and center in people's minds, hasn't it? So I think it's helped in that perspective. So Donna, Bill's used his crystal ball. It's slightly different one for you in terms of the impact of, we've touched upon earlier on Debenhams and Arcadia, but they're big chunks of space. And what are you seeing, do you think, from a retail perspective? Because obviously COVID's pretty much, I think these are structural problems that existed before, and COVID's just accelerated these in reality. So what do you see in terms of the future for the city centre from a retail perspective, if we may lose some of that large space occupied?
Yeah, I think as you've just said there, absolutely what COVID has done is fast forward. It's sped things up by a significant amount of time. So to some extent, would we say we're surprised by some of the news that is coming out? No, I don't think anybody would say that they're surprised by it. It's just how quickly we can respond to it. And I think just going back to that earlier point, there are brands that are choosing Liverpool over and above other cities and recognising it has built a real reputation for doing things differently, for standing up to a challenge, pulling together. And the challenges that we'll face, nobody wants to see large open, spaces that are vacant within the city centre. That's not what we're about at all. So the ability to react to those challenges, I think, is absolutely there. We know that there is a belief in the city. We know there are brands that are turning to Liverpool outside of London as the place to go in order to want to launch their product and work with a very engaged audience. And that's absolutely key at this time. And I think it is about that willingness to step back. And the high street is in a state of flux, and change is on the horizon, but change has always been on the horizon. We've heard many phrases about store as showroom. We also know that people have had to, through necessity, spend a lot more online than they perhaps would have done. In fact, than they definitely would have done had the pandemic not struck. But we've also seen a lot of fantastic data that tells us that people are willing to hold off until the shops reopen again because they want to come out and they want that experience. I remember 3-4 years ago now, probably journalists always having the conversation behind, is online going to kill the high street? No, it's not. It's omni-channel, and it's how the two work together. And actually, that's still the challenge now. We've got some big brands that will start to disappear from the high street, but we've got some new brands that are actually doing fantastic online, and they want a high street physical presence. It's how we adapt to that, and it's how we address lease agreements. It's how we address embracing them, bringing them into our city, into new marketplaces that they don't really know, but we absolutely do know. It's again the power of data. It's the insight, and it's having that highly engaged audience that responds to a lot of the research that is out there. We've seen it throughout the last few months. So there is real light at the end of the tunnel. It's just being able to use that data and use it quickly. And so far, I think the city region and a number of the businesses that have collaborated throughout have set the pace on that. And that's the direction of travel for us to continue to work in such a way.
It's a really positive note to end on, I think, Donna, and we've certainly had an engaged audience throughout the whole of this hour, which is flown past as usual. So, Daryl, I would just very quickly come to you as a closer, really, because obviously you're seeing, different cities and different data. Have you got a final word in terms of, what you've seen and how Liverpool is positioned moving forward?
I think I just will probably want to kind of, really emphasize the point that Donna made. Listen, you will have heard the phrase unprecedented change a million times, but it's true. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us, all actors, all organizations, to really take this as an opportunity to build back better, to understand the situation, and work collaboratively and innovatively to really move the situation forward. There's obviously a load of great examples coming out of Liverpool. I know that Liverpool's really been at the forefront, certainly looking to protect the hospitality sector before the government was willing to do so. It's initiatives like that, and understanding that the economy is changing. That you mentioned different kind of rents, turnover rents becoming more commonplace. It's adapting to that change and being willing to kind of work together to make things better. So right. I agree with everything Donna said. So
brilliant. Thanks very much. Thanks for all the panelists today for your contributions, to the audience for listening in for the last hour. As usual, for our partners for supporting us. We'll have more information on events coming forward, and hopefully we'll be able to do some physical ones pretty soon as well. Also, thanks to Stefan and the Marketing Liverpool team for the support in the background, not just this morning, but the stellar work that they've done in promoting things over social media channels in the course of the last week. I think my battery's about to disappear as well, so it's pretty opportune, I think, to say goodbye to everybody. If I don't see you, as we head into December, have a great Christmas, everybody, and a run up to Christmas, and let's hope that the hospitality sector and the retail sector, we can get behind them and support them, and particularly our local independent ones over the course of the next few weeks. So thanks everybody, take care, and see you all soon.